Welcome, one and all. Welcome to our beautiful audience on Facebook and on the internet. We are live. Our evening lecture this evening with our lecturer par excellence, Clement Soffer. This is our evening tonight where you will be hearing a riveting experience and a riveting speech on the different trials and tribulations that Mr. Soffer has gone throughout his lifetime, and we're happy to welcome all of you here tonight. Before I do start, I would like to share with you a small Torah thought based on this week's parsha. This week's parsha is Pinchas. Our Torah teaches us that Pinchas was the one who came up and stood for the glory of God, for the glory of the Torah, for the respect of God, for the respect of our traditions. And here our Rebbe and our sages teach us that in Judaism, the Torah teaches us to be proud Jews, to be proud of our Judaism, to be proud of our Torah, to be proud of our mitzvot. As a matter of fact, I once heard at one of our international conventions that we have with the Chabad centers worldwide, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs once said, in the name of the many Chabad centers that he visited, and he said like this: I visited many Chabad centers, and what I've seen in the Chabad followers and the Chabad leaders and the Chabad followers and those who attend the Chabad houses, that non-Jews are proud of Jews who are proud of their Judaism, and non-Jews or the communities are embarrassed of Jews or embarrassed of the Yiddish people, the Yiddish community, who are embarrassed of their Judaism. So when we're doing Torah, when we're doing mitzvot, when we're following the word that has been given to us from generation to generation, to follow the dictums and the commandments and the positive attitude that Torah always teaches us to be and to do, by following that kind of way, we become proud Jews, and we have proud communities around us, whether it's Jewish communities, non-Jewish communities, who are proud of our pride in Judaism. You will hear much more of it from Clement Soffer, and as we've spoken about at our last lecture that we had with Mr. Irving Roth, that this is the series called the Ben Weider Memorial Lecture Series. And the idea why our institution, the Chaim Moshe Seminary, the Chabad Seminary, why we introduced these lectures, the Ben Weider Memorial Lectures, is in order to educate the community, in order to bring awareness to the community, whether it's in pride in Judaism, knowledge of our history, knowledge of our people in the past, in order to know and to understand who we are, what we've accomplished in the world, and how much we actually contributed to the betterment of life and to the betterment of mankind in general. It is called the Ben Weider Lecture Series, and just a short note on Ben Weider. I know I invited tonight Mrs. Yudette Weider to be part of our audience tonight. I invited the children, Mr. Eric Weider, Mr. Louis Weider, Mr. Mark Weider, the whole family, to be part of this event this evening, because truthfully, Ben Weider, who passed away approximately 12 years ago in 2008, was a phenomenal and an extraordinary person and human being. He was dedicated for the betterment of other people. He really worked and he really wanted that there should be goodness and kindness in other people, whether it's other children, whether it's other underprivileged members of our community. And he didn't stop only within our community, it was beyond our community, beyond Montreal, beyond Canada, worldwide. his fame, his generosity, his kindness, the kindness of Ben Weider, the generosity of Ben Weider was something which was phenomenal and one of a kind. And I do remember when I approached him many years ago to build our seminary, the Ben Weider Educational Center, which is on the corner of Vezina and Westbury. And I explained, Ben, it's about educating young women who are going to become leaders and directors around the world. They'll set up communities, they'll set up schools, they'll set up mikvahs, they'll set up synagogues and places of worship. So Ben told me, Rabbi, I see your institution as an institution which will have compounded interest. I says, what do you mean, Ben? This is very simple. Your institution is an institution that will be teaching students who are going to be educators, who are going to be teachers. So anybody who gets involved with the seminary, anybody who gets involved with the future of the seminary, whatever investment or whatever interest or whatever efforts will be put into towards the seminary, towards the Ben Weider Educational Center, will be compounded, will be multifold results and multifold reviews in order to make sure that the future of the seminary girls will always be a future that will be forever and ever, as education will always stay forever and ever. The last but not least, I do want to leave one last message about Ben, again, who was a dear friend of mine, a dear friend of our family, is that Ben, aside from being philanthropic and aside from being an acute business person, aside from always having his mind for others, he was a visionary. For him, ethics and values were of utmost importance. And therefore, the humility, the humbleness of Ben Weider that he demonstrated, whether it's meeting with myself or meeting with other people, whether it's in business or community affairs, his humility was his greatness. And we miss him dearly. His family misses him dearly. And we truly hope that these Ben Weider Educational Center, the lectures that we're doing in his memory, will bring about simcha and joy, first and foremost to his neshama, to his soul, but even more so to his family, to his wife, to Mrs. Weider, to the children, and to Klal Yisrael. Amen. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce the two personalities that will be with us tonight. We're going to have our moderator, a good friend of the seminary who's been with us for a while now, and Mr. Aaron Reamer is our moderator tonight. Mr. Aaron Reamer is a friend of mine, is a friend of our seminary, is a very community-minded person. I want to give you a short bio on Mr. Reamer, followed by a short description on Mr. Clement Soffer, tonight's lecturer. Mr. Aaron Reamer is a native Montrealer, began his business career after studying engineering at the Technion and commerce at the Concordia University. He's fluent in 4 languages, including Hebrew. He began his business career as a purchasing agent for Nirvana Management Consultants. In 1976, he was asked to take the helm and then at the then ailing division of Fleur de Lis warehousing, and in a short period of time, he was able to bring back the company to its full glory. Mr. Reamer established Fleur de Lis as a formidable force in the Quebec warehousing market, and for at least 2 decades, the company was an industry leader here in Montreal and across Quebec. Mr. Reamer, together with his wife and children, live in Montreal and Israel and are active participants in the community. He supports a wide range of professional, educational, and communal institutions, including the B'nai Brit. He is a former member of the Canadian Jewish Congress, Montreal Hebrew Free Loan, Israel Bonds, the YMHA, the Jewish National Fund, the Federation CJA, and the Canadian Warehousing Association. Mr. Reamer is also a former director of the Montreal branch of Bet HaLochem, a former treasurer of the House of Israel up in Saint Agathe, the Hebrew Free Loan Society, Chevra Kadisha, the synagogue here in Montreal. He's a former director of the Canadian Warehousing Association. Mr. Reimer has been appointed the national chairman of the B'nai Brit Institute for International Affairs, and is also the national founder of the Canadian Wireless Internet Service Providers Association here in Canada. Mr. Reimer currently resides in Montreal with his wife Deborah, their children Michal, Dana, Madison, Joseph, and Bronte, all of whom have either attended Jewish day schools and Jewish summer camps here in Montreal, in Israel, Boston, and Singapore, respectively. During the 1973 Yom Kippur War, he volunteered and joined the other foreign volunteer corps to assist Israel during that time of crisis. Most of his work was logistical and transport, especially for the delivery of food supplies to the Sinai campaign, as well as to then capture the Egyptian Third Army. Mr. Reimer's hobbies include technology, flying aircraft, boating, railroading, amateur radio, snowmobiling, reading, and information technology. I could say that during our last lecture with Mr. Roth and our lecture now and the different conversations and discussions that I have with Mr. Reimer is an extremely knowledgeable, community-minded, personable, and kind human being, and we are honored that he accepted to be our moderator for this important lecture that we will all experience here in a few moments. Without any further ado, I just want to give a very short intro for Mr. Clement Soffer. I'm going to leave Mr. Reimer, who will be here, who will be on in exactly 1 minute, in order to do the proper introduction. But all I could tell you, Mr. Clement Soffer, I spoke to him. The first time I spoke to him, I was on the phone with him for about 55 minutes or an hour. And I was just supposed to speak to him to say hello and to make all the arrangements with Mr. Soffer, but I couldn't get off the phone for almost 1 hour time. And Mr. Soffer came across to me as a very warm, very dedicated individual, dedicated in the sense that he really wants the better and the goodness of another person, so that another soul should not suffer, another soul should be free and should be in the utmost of comfort. But instead of me going any further in any of the history or story or biography of Mr. Clement Soffer, I want to now give over the microphone to our dear moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, please welcome warmly our moderator, Mr. Aaron Reimer.
Thank you, Rabbi. I just want to confirm it's definitely an honor for me to be here. I also had the opportunity to speak to Mr. Soffer a couple of times, and each time I was only more enthusiastic and looking forward to tonight. Just a point of information, one thing which you did neglect to mention in your references to Mr. Weider, there's one other famous thing about the Weider family that we should all take note of. It was the Weiders who discovered Arnold Schwarzenegger in Austria and basically helped build him up to bring him to North America. And he was their first prodigy on their magazines that they founded, their bodybuilding magazines. So there is a connection between Montreal and Arnold Schwarzenegger. So just as long as he doesn't say he'll be back. Now going on to Mr. Soffer, again, I'm going to go into his bio, but I'm going to try and keep it as brief as possible because his story in itself is a bio. So for me to go through his bio and then he's going to tell you his story, it's just going to be a lot of redundancy. But just to tell you about the man that I spoke to and that I met briefly, virtually, of course, and that is he took so much care and wanting to understand the makeup of our audience. He wanted to know, am I speaking to people who are educated? Am I speaking to people who are knowledgeable in this field? Am I speaking to people who are just going to get up and walk out after 5 minutes because I'm going to bore them? So what do I want to be able to be informative Yet I don't want to speak too long. I want to speak only enough time that they keep them interested. But I think his concern for how he delivers is an example of the kind of person that we're going to be meeting shortly. And his experience, of course, in history and in life is very telling. As you all know, Israel had many wars, and the War of 48 was our first major war. But the second war was the Sinai campaign in 1956, where the British and the French, together with Israel, kind of like muscled in on the Sinai, on Egypt, to try and get back control of the canal and the various other resources. And of course, the Americans put a quick stop to that eventually. But it was because of those campaigns and other problems of anti-Semitism that forced Clement to have to flee at a young age of 16 in 1957, a year after the war, to North America with the help of Senator Jacob Javits. And he came and he studied at the Mir Yeshiva in Brooklyn, New York. So he already started out as a Talmudic person, as somebody who was going down the path of education. It was a young age, but it showed that he was on the right track. He didn't have any relatives in the United States. And his family, of course, was forced to stay in Egypt. In 1960, he met and later married Emma Gottlieb. So he got married young, too. Emma and Clement have 2 married sons and 4 grandchildren. By the age of 20, he was the founder and a board member of the first Jewish Egyptian synagogue in Brooklyn, Ahava Ve'ahav Achvai congregation. In 1969, he joined the Clement Jewish Center in Clement, New York, and was elected to the Board of Trustees. I won't go into all the details, but he was very much involved with the equivalent to the Federation, the United Jewish Appeal, Israel Bonds, and all the other organizations. He then became a leader in the Sephardic community and the Education Foundation in New York City. He eventually moved into one of the suburbs, into Sands Point. He became a founding member and president of the Chabad of Port Washington with Rabbi Shalom Paltiel. And in the early 90s, he was the executive VP of the Council for the Rescue of Syrian Jews. And he played a prominent part in the rescue of the last 4,500 Jews remaining in Syria. And that's what his story is going to be all about tonight. I'm not going to go into any other details except to say that he also tried to save many of the cemeteries in the Levant. And he was a recipient of many congressional awards in the United States, by both on a state level and on a federal level. He was honored by many of the big top universities, such as the Yeshiva University. And he was a founding member and supervised the construction of the Edmund Jacob Soffer Synagogue. As you know, Edmund Soffer was a very famous Jewish philanthropist who was also in the banking business. Clement speaks 6 languages. I had the luxury of speaking to him in at least 2 of them. And he was involved in business, owning ladies' boutique stores, and had an excess of $40 million a year in cash flow. But he also founded the Juju Jeans Company, which had an excess of $100 million in cash flow. So very successful philanthropist, very successful business person, and more important, a very important leader in the Sephardic community and Jewish community at wide. And it's with this that I have a great pleasure to introduce our friend and our neighbor to the south, Clement Soffer. Take it away.
Shalom. B'Shem Hashem na'aseh v'nasliach. In the name of all names, we will do and we will accomplish. First of all, I'd like to thank Rabbi Abraham Cohen, Yossi Cohen, Miriam Sabah Ditkovsky, and also our moderator, Mr. Aaron Reamer. Thank you very much for inviting me tonight. And I also want to thank very much the Weider Foundation for helping the Chabad and being visionaries into the future as to what would become of our future generation. And the only way they can do that really is by supporting this Chabad of the seminary. Thank you, and thank each and every one of you that is listening tonight. for being here and spending the time to listen to an intriguing, fascinating, miraculous story that happened in Syria from 1989 to 1995. I will start first by how I was introduced to this rescue. I was invited, surprisingly, one Shabbat to come to the Deal synagogue, even though I lived in Sands Point. Deal, New Jersey is quite far, but Rabbi Dweck at the time, who was the rabbi in the Deal synagogue, invited me to come and present a presentation of how I was able to save a Jewish cemetery in Egypt, 1,250 years old, slated for total demolition and been taken away. And truly, my grandfather and my grandmother are buried there, and I didn't want them to be touched. So I went into a war against Egypt, and I got back the cemetery from Hosni Mubarak, the president of Egypt, built a bridge and saved the cemetery, put walls and gates and cleaned the entire cemetery. That cemetery is called El Basatin in Cairo, Egypt, and it is second to Har Hazetim. Har Hazetim is the oldest Jewish cemetery we have. El Basatin is the second one that was saved for 1,250 years. And I was making my presentation that Shabbat. After I completed my explanation, which tonight I'm not going to go into the cemetery and the detail of that, the vice president of the Deal synagogue, Mr. Morris Ardell, comes over to me and says, you know, I just heard you speak and how you were able to convince Egypt to give you that cemetery. I think you'd be very helpful to help my daughter, Alice Ardell, who is an attorney in New York City. And she has a committee that's called the Council for the Rescue of Syrian Jews. And I would love if you can meet with her and join with her, and maybe you can be a part of that committee, and you can influence maybe Syria to release 4,500 Jews that are held hostage in Syria, suffering an enormous amount of suffering. Listening to this and coming from a background where I also suffer enormously at age 16, I decided that this was a call for me. And I believe very much in Hashem guidance and giving me mitzvah after mitzvah. We have called mitzvah goreret mitzvah, which is, I was speaking about a mitzvah to save a Jewish cemetery, and here comes out of the blue another mitzvah for me to take on. So I took it on and I called Alice Ardell and I met. My first meeting with Alice and her committee was fascinating. I saw in her a very dedicated lady. Practically, I found out later on that she is unstoppable. And also I met with Marco Zolta. Alice was an attorney. Marco Zolta is an attorney in New York City. And Jack Mann was a businessman, and I was another businessman. When we came and discussed, they explained to me the situation in Syria. Situation in Syria was disastrous for the Jewish people. They were handled like Nazi Germany, but without numbers on their arm. They were held hostages, 3 police mukhabarat watching every family. Their neighbors were Palestinians, so in case they did anything, they were immediately reported. They couldn't go into business. They had a terrible time, and at random, they can walk into any Jewish home and kill the wife and the children with no consequences to suffer. Many people were just killed in the street just because they were Jewish, and many were hanged on trees, because if any issues happen in Syria, whether they raise the price of oil or sugar or petrol, immediately they blamed the Jews for it, as usually, and decided the Hafez El Assad, who was known as the butcher of homes, can go and pick up a few Jews, hang them in a public square, and accuse them that they were the perpetrator of all this excitement in the country, and the reason for the increase in the prices of oil and gas and and sugar, etc. And I felt that this was similar case to what we had in Egypt. So I decided to join, and then they turned around and asked me, what would your participation be to our committee? We also, the Council for Rescue of Syrian Jews was supported by 40 other Jewish Syrian people. But the heart of the council was Alice Ardell, Marco Zolta, Jack Mann, and there were many other supporters, but it takes too long for me to name each and every one of them. But they were great Jews and always supporting. I saw in those three people great position to be partners with them and to take on this task, to try to rescue all these Jews out of Syria. My position, I explained that I consider immediately the best way, what I did to Egypt, we can possibly do to Syria, is chercher l'argent, means we go after the money. Let's analyze how Syria earn their money. Where do they get their income? How do they become powerful, from where their strength comes in? And let's go after that strength and cut it off. That means that whatever income coming into Syria, we squeeze Syria and we will get what we want. They liked the idea, and they told me that they were already on their way of similar thoughts. So we were in the meeting of the minds of how to proceed to get all these Syrian Jews out of Syria. But the Council of Rescue of Syrian Jews was unknown. So we decided that we needed to be more known throughout the United States. Our best connection was starting with AIPAC, American Israeli Political Committee. We joined them, and their director, Joel Schnur, was magnificent, took us under his umbrella, and agreed to present us to every congressman, every senator, every president or king or that come to New York and meet with them, that we will have the introduction and see what we can do to connect with them. Our first congressmen that got involved with us were Stephen Solars of Brooklyn, Charles Schumer, Benjamin Gilman, and Wayne Owens. Let me just tell you about Wayne Owens first, from Utah. Wayne Owens is a Gentile, a righteous Jew. Wayne Owens, the minute he heard that what we were trying to do, immediately he offered us his services. He offered us his office if we ever go to Washington, his staff, and his entire operation to introduce us to additional other congressmen and senators. He was a great man. Unfortunately, he passed away, but he was very, very helpful. Stephen Solars was the congressman from Brooklyn. Stephen Solars, I was told, had started way back in 1972 with another gentleman from the Syrian community named Stephen Shalom. Stephen Shalom and Stephen Solars made a committee and tried to help to get Syria to participate and to release some of these Jews. At the same time, they had also a lady with them named Judy Felkar from Canada. She was also a big philanthropist, married to a doctor, raised a lot of money, and helped a lot of Jews. But as she said her story later on in her books and everywhere else, she meant that she was paying blackmail money to ease up the pain of the Jews by reaching money through the mukhabarat, the police, so they wouldn't put so much pressure. And many times she even paid blackmail money to try to have Jews run out of Syria via Lebanon or Turkey on the border, paying some of these police at the borders. But sometimes the Jews were caught and suffered tremendous consequences because probably the money did not reach them in time to help to release those Jews. So they put the pressure on them. And that was what was going on in Syria. And Syria, in order for it to come closer to the United States, being that Stephen Solars was the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Syria decided to make a gesture towards him and offered him 14 women back in 1972 to be released to come to Brooklyn, to Syria, from Syria to Brooklyn. The end result was that these women came. The culture was a clash for them. Half of them went back to Syria. The other half found husbands in Brooklyn from the Syrian community. But it was really, he was given to Stephen Solars and Stephen Shalom what I call fatafit, which is really mean crumbs. It was just, I don't mean that the people were crumbs, but it was such a small payout to give them 14 women when they were holding hostage 4,500 people, men, wife, children, and husbands in Syria, and suffering tremendous consequences. I felt from what has happened back in 72, it was a disastrous situation, and that our goal should be all of them go out or nothing. And you will see later on in my story what happens when we were working into releasing those Jews. Subsequently, when we got introduced to Charles Schumer's, Stephen Solars, Benjamin Gilman, Congressman Tom Lantos from California heard about us. He had a Congress of Human Rights caucus, invited Alice Sardell and some of us to go down to address the United States Congress Caucus for Human Rights. When we went there, we were explained that they had no clue that there were Jews living in Syria. They had no idea. And when we started to tell them with pictures what was happening to those Jews, the entire Human Caucus was in uproar and decided to support our committee to the maximum extent. We also immediately, at the same time, we got introduced to our American ambassador to Syria. His name was Edward Dirigian, and his assistant, Christopher Ross. Christopher Ross was also, you probably have heard of him, part of the peace process with the Israelis into Syria. So Edward Dirigian was a phenomenal ambassador with great heart and caring heart, and he wanted to help us as much as possible to get those Syrian Jews released. His first step and the first advice was, I would like you to meet with the Syrian ambassador Walid al-Muallam in Washington, D.C. And we met with Walid al-Muallam. We met several times. One time we were at Congressman, at the time he was a Congressman, Charles Schumer office, and we met Walid al-Muallam, and we brought him Syrian pastries, and we tried to build a relationship with him and tried to get friendly. And even in front of Charles Schumer said, you know, any of you guys want to come to Syria to see your brethren, Jews, people, how we treat them magnificently, you are invited to come. So I told him immediately, we would like to give you our passport and come to get a visa to come to Syria. He said, yeah, sure. You give to Soher, my secretary, your passports, and we will get you the visa. You can travel to Syria and see how the Jews are. If we ever saw those visas being on our passport within months, that was something. We never saw the visa and our passport was returned. That was our first connection with Walid al-Muallam. And by the way, Walid al-Muallam presently is the foreign minister of Syria. I met him maybe a dozen times or more. When also Edward Dirigian suggested that we meet at the State Department with the Syrian desk. Every country that has a connection with the United States has a desk, which is a representation of communication between the United States government and the government of specific countries. Syria has a desk in Washington, D.C. at the State Department. We met with the officers in charge of the State Department of Syrian desk. And we told them that our goal was to try to get equal citizenship for the Jews of Syria. Because the Syrian Jews, the way they were held hostage, similar to Egypt and many other countries, only one person can travel out of the country. If he does not come back on the decided day and time, the family would go to jail and will never be heard from. So anybody that traveled, and that was their excuse to the world. Look, Jews are traveling. They can go and come back. Yes, one person at a time. You cannot have two, or a father and son, or a husband and wife to travel out of the country. One person doesn't come back, the family is unheard of and disappears immediately. This is how they held hostages. So when we went to the State Department and we explained that to them, they said, this is a position that will never be, Syria will never allow the release of the Jews until they have peace with Israel. Our answer to that, we have nothing to do with the peace process. We are here to discuss a human rights issue. The human rights issue is that those Jews are not equal citizens to the rest of Syrian people. Their equal rights to citizenship is to travel freely, all of them at one time as they wish. That's called equal rights in Syria. They should have the same rights to work, same rights to travel, same rights to live, go to hospitals, etc. They are not third and fourth, and in Syria, they were probably the 10th class citizens. Our first letter that was addressed by the Senate was sponsored by Senator Joseph Lieberman, Arlen Specter, who passed away, John McCain, who passed away now, Richard Lugar, also of Indiana, passed away. And it was all endorsed by 67 senators, telling Hafez El Assad that he should either release the Jews or give them equal citizenship in his country so they would not have to suffer embarrassing and anti-Semitism effect against the community. We decided further that we wanted to check on them, and we got a volunteer, Senator Howard Metzenbaum of Ohio. He born in Cleveland. Senator Metzenbaum, who is Jewish, agreed to go to Syria and took with him a conference of several senators and went to Syria. But before going, we met with him and we explained that once he would go to Syria and meet with the Jewish community, they will tell him that Hafez El Assad is magnificent and that they feel free and nobody is hurting them and nobody is troubling them and they're all free to do whatever they wish. And then I told them, watch all around that meeting, you will find at least between 80 to 100 secret police mukhabarat posted in there. And if any one of them spoke against the country or the president or anything that's happening, the following week they will disappear with their families and they will be shot for being traitors. So, but understand that once you go there, we feel that your visit to that community will show that the United States Senate care about the Jews in Syria enough to go visit the community. And that will elevate the community to a different position in front of the eyes of the Mukhabarat and the Syrian government. Subsequently, Alice Sardell was able to connect with Carlos Saul Menem. Carlos Saul Menem was the president of Argentina. Carlos was born in Syria. His brother at that time happened to be the Argentinian ambassador to Syria. So his connection to Syria was important to us. Alice Sardell met with Carlos Menem, and a few of us went. And at that meeting, we got assurances from Carlos Menem that he would be helpful to us and to the Syrian Jews, and will try to convince Hafez El Assad to help exit the Jews. I believe he did. But I believe also that Hafez El Assad was like Pharaoh, and he was not listening to any of what was going on. We needed further, so we decided to go on rallies. We created rallies with the help of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, and we immediately went against the embassy and the consulate in New York, the embassy in Washington, and the embassy in Paris, London, Sydney, Australia, all at the same time on the same day, and as much as we can, claiming, let our people go. That was our cry. Let my people go. That's what we decided to use as a cry and as a push against the Syrian authoritarian government of Hafez El Assad. And we were quite effective. Immediately, the ambassador called us to have a meeting at that time, Walid al-Muallam, and says, why are you complaining and embarrassing the country for no reason when we gave you 14 women and 7 of them went back? They want to stay in our country. They want to come back. Why do you want to take them out? These are citizens of Syria, and you have no right to incite them to leave. We explained to him that their position in Syria was exactly like being under the Nazis. In fact, part of the police mukhabarat in Syria were Nazi officers that were directing and guiding the mukhabarat, the secret police of Syria. We then, as we worked, we looked at the money. Syria needed money to pay for wars that they've had with Israel. The money was, they went to the European Parliament and they asked them for a loan of $850 million loan. And with our connection through the banking world, we were able to block this loan. They went further to Belgium, to the IMF, to borrow $700 million. On the IMF committee that allows the reception of loan or agreement of loan was a gentleman by the name of Edmund Soffer. Edmund Soffer and I were great friends from way back. He helped me build the first shul for the Egyptian Jews, Ahaba Behaba. He gave me a $400,000 loan, and he was a great philanthropist, and I built a relationship with him, and he was even my banker in my business of Juju Design Inc. He sits on the IMF Council. He agreed to convince his committee to cancel the loan, and they refused to give the money to Syria. They further went to Italy to borrow $600 million. But what they didn't know that Edmund Soffer and his wife, they have a social relationship with the Agnelli family in Italy. The Agnelli family controls a Fiat in Italy. Very powerful family. They are the owners of Fiat. And Edmund Soffer and his wife socialized with the Agnelli family. And being that the money was requested from Italy, we were lucky to have Edmund Soffer talk to the Agnelli family. Agnelli family convinced the Italian government to bounce out the loan. The loan was refused again. So these were pins that I was putting into Syria, Hafez El Assad, and how to bring him down to a position where he can give us those Jews. The fourth pin that came to me was from Hashem, from God, really. And I will explain and I hope you allow me the time to explain. I was a vice president of ISEF, International Sephardic Education Foundation. We had a mission that I was the leader of that mission to take to Israel a group of people, and we go visit all the universities and help finance the universities for Jewish studies, etc. And we also had a side trip to Spain, because Spain that year, 1992, announced that they wanted to invite all the leadership, Jewish leadership, Sephardic Jewish leadership, to Spain to attend a conference with King Juan Carlos and Queen Sofia, his wife. And we went there to Spain, and we were sitting in Toledo, Ohio, which was a fortress that back in 1392 was the headquarters of the torture for all the Sephardic Jews. And right above us were all the chambers where they used to torture all the Jews, and what they did to them was, I cannot even describe it to you. Okay? What Spain did to the Jewish people back in those times. And here we are sitting now in the same fortress with King Juan Carlos of Spain and his wife Sofia in front of us. They were maybe 25 feet away from me. And that night we had, as a guest of the king, we had Placido Domingo, Luciano Pavarotti, and Zubin Mehta were there singing and preparing us for the speech of the king. While they were singing Shema Yisrael in Hebrew. And every word that was said in the song Shema, the letter Shin went into the chambers where they used to torture. The letter Mem went there, and we can see, if we turn around, we can see the word Shema Yisrael projected on the chambers. I don't know if any of you can feel what I felt. My spine was tingling with cries of happiness and tears that 500 years earlier, if this king was alive and he was saying to us, we want the Sephardic Jews to come back, we want to give them equal citizenship, I want to be known as the king that will help all the Jews all over the world if they are suffering. I was fascinated. I was so touched that night just to hear and to see the song and how the king was warm to us and how he presented himself and what he wanted to do for all Sephardic Jews throughout the world, and actually all Jews in essence. When we came back to New York, we had a discussion with the Elie Wiesel Foundation. And we decided that we need to honor this king, because a king that is there, that wants to help all Jews on this planet, is to be honored. So Elie Wiesel Foundation decided to make an honorary night, and they made a $1,000 dinner plate at the Pierre Hotel. Everybody was invited, including myself. And I knew that the king was very helpful to Jewish causes. I had prepared a dossier. I had listened to the king's speech in Spain, and I had prepared a dossier of all what we had accomplished from day one till that day to save Syrian Jewry. And I felt that maybe this king can be influential, being that he loves to help the Jews, maybe can be influential with Assad. So that night, I asked the Elie Wiesel Foundation if they would allow me to meet the king for 5 minutes and present him with this dossier that I had prepared. They felt that it was not the proper time, that we are not going to try to nickel and dime this king. He's coming to give us a great position, that he wants to help the Jews. We should not annoy him with the dossier. If you want, Clement, we will arrange this dossier to meet with him later on in the week, if possible, if we can make that time. And they refused that I meet the king and give him this dossier. Yet I knew what the king had in his heart. And the same speech that I heard 3 months earlier in Toledo, Spain, I hear it again in the Pierre Hotel at this dinner. And I was there with my wife. And the more I heard the king, the more my blood was boiling, that I was frustrated, that I wanted to give him the dossier, and I was held back. As the king was about to leave, something came over to me and said, deliver this message to the king. Deliver your message to the king. The king walks on the red carpet. I know the protocol coming from Egypt. Nobody is allowed to walk on the red carpet while the king is on it. If you do, the guard will shoot you and kill you immediately as we talk, because they think that you're attacking the king. And I know that from Egypt, from our King Farouk. I've always learned that protocol, red carpet, you don't walk on the king's carpet. I felt if I walk there, they will kill me. So I turned around and asked my beautiful wife, Emma, and I told her she was dressed in a gorgeous gown and beautiful jewelry. And I said, Emma, innocently, she didn't know, can you do me a favor? Can you step on the red carpet for this king and stop him? And I will be right in back of you. Move out of the way, and I want to talk to the king. My wife, Emma, innocently decided that that's what she's going to do to help me. She walked in on the carpet. The king stopped. She said to the king, Your Majesty, my husband wants to talk to you. She walked away. I turned around and said, Your Majesty, I was in Toledo. I heard you, what you said. I heard you tonight. I need your help. I have 4,500 Jews held hostage in Syria. You want to help us? Please tell Assad to give them equal citizenship, so if they want to leave, they can leave. The king looked at me and says, I'm surprised that you're asking me this. My foreign minister is going to give them a loan next week for almost $500 million agricultural loan. I said, Your Majesty, I've stopped them from the European Council. I stopped them at the IMF. I stopped them in Italy. They are not using the money for any agriculture. They're using the money to pay back Russia for all their weaponry. Please stop the finance minister. Do not send him, and ask him to help us to release those Jews. The king said, Give me the dossier. I gave the dossier to the king. He left. 4 days later, I knew Rabbi Garson, who was the chief rabbi in Spain. I called Rabbi Garson, and he had already heard that I had stopped the king on his carpet. He had the news. And I said to him, I need to know what the king did with my dossier. He said, It's funny that you asked me, Clement. I am the teacher of Queen Sophia. I teach her Gemara. I teach her Zohar. I teach her Jewish Talmudic studies with me. And she likes that type of philosophy. And I am her teacher. I can find out from her what happened to the dossier. 2 weeks later, Rabbi Garson calls me up and say, the foreign minister went to Syria, did not give them the money, but told Syria that they must treat the Jews equally, give them equal citizenship. And that was my fourth pin for Assad to release the Jews. But we needed one more pin. And this pin came again from Hashem. It did not come from me. I am nothing. I'm just a tool. Like all my committee were a tool. We were dedicated, each and every one of us, dedicated to the heart. We left our business, we left everything, and just did this 7 days a week, 24-hour, 24/7. The last pin came to me. They were honoring a gentleman by the name of Walter Weiner, whom I used to socialize with. He was the chairman of Republic National Bank. Republic National Bank is owned by Edmund Soffer. So I was socializing with Walter Weiner. He was honored by the I apologize. It's skipping me for a second. He was honored by one of the federation arm from the United States. And that federation, usually they make a big dinner in one of the big hotel at the Plaza Hotel. And at that Plaza Hotel, it was a $500 dinner. They invite all the bankers, all the accountants. They all come in honor of the Walter Weiner, or the honoree. At that night, they needed a speech writer or a speech speaker. They used that night a gentleman by the name of Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell owned a huge newspaper company in London and was international connection. Robert Maxwell comes on as a speaker and tells us that he was a Shiva Bachur in Czechoslovakia. At age 8, he saw the Germans coming into his town. He jumped the window from his yeshiva, ran into the forest, joined the partisans, was fighting the Germans, was arrested, taken to Auschwitz. He was put on a number on his arm. And when he went into Germany, somehow he was able to escape, jump off from the train because he was almost already in Poland. He joined the Polish partisans, and he was a fighter. The Polish partisans shipped him to London to become part of MI6, which is the secret arm of London. And he was assigned as the chief in charge in Czechoslovakia because that was his main, he was born in Czechoslovakia and he spoke the language. So they assigned him to Czechoslovakia as being head of MI6. He, in turn, helped Israel. What you see, the armament, the Messerschmitts that were assembled came from Czechoslovakia. Those 4 Messerschmitts that were the first Israeli planes for the Air Force of Israel. He sent them weaponry throughout, all secretly smuggled from Czechoslovakia to Israel. He was a hero and buried in Israel as a hero, but he was killed, unfortunately, in Cyprus by the militant of Al-Qaeda. Robert Maxwell said to us that night that part of his speech that he had the ear of Gorbachev. Gorbachev had hired him to help him with Izvestia, which is the Russian newspaper. And because he was helping the Russian newspaper, he had the ear of Gorbachev. I immediately, once I heard this, I felt that that was the greatest pin that I need to help me with Hafez El Assad. At the end of his speech, I asked Walter Wiener to introduce me to Robert Maxwell for a cup of coffee at the Plaza Hotel. I went with Walter and Robert Maxwell. We sat down at the Plaza Hotel, and I explained to Robert Maxwell, you have a number. I have 4,500 Jews without a number, but they suffered the same way you're suffering. I need to get them out. You have the ear of Gorbachev. Gorbachev is the main supplier of arms for Syria. If I can get Gorbachev to tell Hafez El Assad to release the Jews, I think we are home free. I have done A, B, C, D, E, F. This is the last pin that can help me. Please help me. Robert Maxwell, being a good Jew and a sufferer also, like me, like him, decided, I will help you, Clem, and I will address the message to Gorbachev. 2 weeks later, that was around the beginning of March, I hear that the Minister of War of Russia was going to Syria to supply Syria with the repairs of MiG-17 and MiG-91 and the Russian tanks and etc., all kind of weaponry that they were going to supply Syria with. And I was surprised because here I was asking Gorbachev to speak to Assad, and I hear from the New York Times that this finance and war minister are going to supply Syria with all kind of weaponry. I was shocked. But 3 weeks later, the beginning of April, I read in the same New York Times, those 2 gentlemen, the war minister and the finance minister, came back to Russia, refused to give Hafez El Assad any weaponry, plus they demanded that he pays what he owed them to the last penny, and he must release the Jews to give them equal citizenship. That was written in the New York Times. You cannot understand the happiness, the pride that we were able, just by Hashem's guidance. We did not do much. We just connected the dots, and we were the dots that were connected by Hashem. And all of a sudden, on April 25, actually April 26, we see in the New York Times an announcement, Hafez El Assad decided to give equal citizenship to all the Jews of Syria, and they are free to travel as they wish, and now they are equal citizens in Syria. This was now the biggest moment. That's an unbelievable moment for us, a committee of 4 people, Alice Ardell, Marco Zolta, Jack Mann, and myself, that we've been working almost 6 years fighting in the trenches to get these. Actually, it was at the time 1992. It was not a full 6 years. It was from 1989 to 1992 is about 3.5 years approximately that we're working. And they got their exit visa. And that's how we brought those Jews to New York. There were other things that happened, but I believe I'm taking too much of your time, and I'm trying to cut it short as much as I can. And this is what happened. And the Jews finally came to Brooklyn. We brought all of them to Brooklyn. 4,500 Jews came to Brooklyn. Thank you very much for listening to me tonight. And if you have any questions, I'm ready to answer any of your questions. Please.
Thank you, Clement. While you were talking about your wonderful experience on the red carpet with the king, in 1992, I attended a delegation from our city in Montreal. And the delegation did a tour of Spain, and it also included a meeting in the palace with the king. And of course, you know, before you go in, there's another room that you go in first where the protocol officer teaches you all the rules and regulations before you actually go into the king. And the purpose of the visit was basically, it was exactly 500 years after the proclamation of Queen Isabella. And they wanted to reach out to different communities around the world, Jewish communities. One of them happened to have been Montreal. And I was part of this delegation, which was an amazing group. And he greeted us the most polite way. He gave us a document, which is in our synagogue. It's being preserved, talking about the emancipation of the Jews after 500 years since the signing of the original decree expelling the Jews from Spain. So that's just a parenthesis of your experience, and to me it was very touching to hear that you had a similar experience with the king on a different level, and certainly much more important. I'd like to get into the questions. I'm going to try and keep them as brief as possible. Some of you have already sent in your messages, and I guess they will get first reading, and we'll start as follows. You mentioned in some of your writing, in your bio, that there was a letter that Bill Clinton sent to you stating that the ambassador at the time, Daniel Cursor, will be prepared to assist you in getting clearance to export the Sifrei Torah out of Egypt, because at that time you were also very much connected to Egypt, cemeteries as well. How did you get the attention of the United States president for this? How did you get to the level of the president of the US, Mr. Clinton?
I used to live at 200 Central Park South, and one of persons that I knew was a lady by the name of Denise Rich. Denise Rich lived around the corner from me, 5th Avenue and 59th Street. And one evening she had a party and invited some of the big senators and congressmen into her home. And that night I was there, and I was pleasantly surprised to see President Clinton at that party. And at the same time, also Vice President Gore attended that party, and many senators. Senator D'Amato was there, and there were many senators. This was a political party to raise also funds for the president. I happened to have been there, and I met the president. And during our conversation, I had a conversation with him, and I asked him if he can do me a favor. That was 1997, 1998. If he would help me with, I wanted to take out all the Sifrei Torah from Egypt and all our archives and books, etc., because especially the archives were very precious to us. It showed who was married to whom, and we had a rabbinate in Cairo that was very powerful, and we had some very archives and books from old time. And I needed help in Egypt because it was after that I saved the cemetery. The saving of the cemetery in Egypt was in 1987, and it took till 1989. This was now 1997. That's how I met President Clinton and Vice President Gore. I was given access also to the White House. I had permission to come in and out anytime I wanted. At the time, I had clearance for the White House, and I was able to do many things with President Clinton.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next question, I just want to mention that for those of you who did not catch the banners that were moving previously, we do have a raffle tonight. And the raffle is for the book called My Story, 41 Personal Encounters with the Rebbe. It has a value of $50. And just follow the links on your on the screen, and you'll be able to get a chance to getting the book. Getting to the next question, if you had a chance to redo the rescue, would you do it differently?
I would do it again and again and again the same exact way, because I believe very strongly when you go after the money, that is when you obtain what you need. This world, unfortunately, is managed by money. When you go after the money, they cave in. I went after the money in Egypt. That's how I got the cemetery. I blocked their $2.3 billion, and Egypt came wanting their money. Because of that, they gave me the cemetery. The same thing would happen with Syria. And I believe now the world is aware, and they go after the terrorists and they go after their money. And that's the right way to do things, to bring everybody down until you control them by their money.
Thank you, Clement. And did they all come out by 1995?
Excuse me?
Did they all come out by 1995?
We had an issue by 1992 when President Clinton came to power. What had happened, Hafez El Assad was dealing before with the previous administration of Bush Sr. and Secretary Baker. And they had given their agreement to them that they would give equal citizenship to all the Jews of Syria in 1992. But when they saw that Bush lost and Clinton came to power, they felt they can get a better deal from the Clinton administration. So they shut the window on the Jews. And if you would notice, I have in back of me, the Congressional Award reads that at that time, in April of 1993, it showed only that I was able to save 2,600 Jews, which was the amount of Jews that came out by April 1993. The rest were held back from December of 1992 until 1993, April, May, when finally we were able to reach President Clinton with my connection. And we went through Secretary of State of Warren Christopher and Martin Indyk, his assistant. Martin Indyk is a Jew. Secretary of State Warren is a phenomenal human being. He really took the cause to heart and went to Assad and told him, read him the Riots Act. Release the Jews or America would lose faith in you. Continue releasing them or there will never be any agreement with you and the United States. And that's how finally we got 99% of the Jews to go out by 1995. But there were still a few families that were hesitant. They owned businesses, they owned buildings, they wanted to stay. And there were maybe 4 or 5 families that stayed after that. But the rest, 4,500 Jews, came to the United States by 1995.
Thank you, Clement. We have a Facebook question, and it is, how was General Norman Schwarzkopf involved?
That was another phenomenal Hashem guidance. During the procedure that we were visiting Washington continuously on a weekly basis, I wanted to connect, and I did connect previously with 2 senators, Senator Keston of Wisconsin, Bob Keston, and Senator Daniel Inouye from Hawaii. And I wanted to ask their help. They helped me with the Egyptian cemetery. I was hoping that they might help me with the Syrian Jews. So we went to their office, me and Alice Sardell and Gil Khan, who was also our advisor, political advisor, and we met with both senators. And I started my speech accidentally. My background, originally, my grandparents are from Iraq, Baghdad. And I started my speech saying to the senator, Senator, I don't want that the Jews of Iraq suffers bombing from Schwarzkopf, and he's bombing as of tomorrow. He's starting to carpet bomb Baghdad, and there is Jewish cemetery, Jewish synagogue, archives that date back thousands and thousands of years. We need to help out. Don't let this happen. I need you to help me right now with the Syrian Jews. And if you can help me with the Iraqi Jews, it'll be wonderful. Both senators were clueless. They said to me, there is Jews in Iraq. We had no idea. I said, there is at least 1,000 Jews. They're all over Iraq. That's all that is left from a great community of over 200 or 150,000 Jews in Iraq. So can you please make sure that they don't get harmed? They said to me, Clement, please give me a map of every Jewish cemetery, every Jewish synagogue, and where these archives are, and we will connect with General Schwarzkopf. I said, sure, I will try to get you anything you want. Alice, sitting next to me as an attorney, kicked me in my foot and said, how can you promise something like that? How do you possibly can get a map with all these locations for the senators? I said, Hashem will provide. We walked out of there, and the senators also helped us with Syrian Jewry, and they were waiting for me to give them a map. We walked out, and I said, Hashem, please help me. I need to get this map to direct Schwarzkopf not to hit and damage all these synagogues and cemeteries. The thought came to me that I knew from Egypt Eliyahu Ben Elisar, who was the Israeli ambassador to Cairo. I knew him. So I called the Israeli embassy in Washington, and I asked them that I want to speak to Mr. Eliyahu Ben Elisar. The person that came to me on the telephone was Zalman Shoval. He was the ambassador for the United States from Israel. And I explained to him what I was looking from Ben Elisar. He said to me, Clement, you're an individual. We cannot give you such a map of such secrecy. If you wish, we'll send it to the senators. I said, please do. Send the location of every synagogue, every cemetery in Iraq to save them, and the archives. They said, we will send that map to the senators. That was on a Monday. By Friday, I get a call from both senators on the phone into my office telling me, Clement, General Schwarzkopf said that he got a map, he will not bomb any place, and in fact, in every location that you said, if he was sending paratrooper, he'll send the paratroopers in. But please, Clement, do not discuss this with anyone, because Saddam Hussein will be able to store his tanks and guns and weaponry into the synagogue, and it will be a disaster for us to handle this. Just know that Schwarzkopf guaranteed that these areas will not be touched. That's how General Schwarzkopf came into the story involved with the Syrian Jews.
Thank you, Clement. Another question on Facebook. Whatever happened to the 7 women that went back?
Unfortunately, they went back, and the government of Syria presented them as heroes in Syria, and we lost track of them. But they came out with the rest of them 25 years later. Of course, they got married in Syria, they had children, etc. We were able to get those 4,500 Jews, and the miracle is, I was very much afraid at the time from Al-Qaeda or Muslim Brotherhood to attack the Jewish community, which at the time they were a very, very popular and very big terrorist organization. But if they would have stayed, if those Jews would have stayed in Syria, and I would have failed with my committee to take them out, By 2013, there would have been 10,000 Jews. And guess what happened in 2013? ISIS came to these same town, Kamishli, Damascus, many towns where Jews lived, and they would have slaughtered those 10,000 Jews. You saw what they did to the poor Christians, how they were cutting their throats just because they were Christians. So it would have been a disaster to leave those Jews, and that's what happened.
Thank you, Clement. If you had to put a numerical value, dollars, on the whole project from the very beginning when you first sat in that Dueck synagogue till the very end, to the last Jew came out, how much do you think, I'm not saying from you or from any specific people, but globally, how much money, how much capital was invested in making all this happen?
Well, we had a tremendous financial support from the Syrian community of Brooklyn, which is the many Jewish communities that we have in Brooklyn. They financed us to stay in power because we had to go to Washington almost on a weekly basis, flying in and sitting with senators, entertaining them and supporting their campaign. Well, I would say we spent close to maybe $500,000 or maybe almost $800,000 were spent, donated part by the Syrian community of Brooklyn and donated part by the Mexican Syrian community. They gave us almost over $100,000 they raised for us to continue our work and to make sure that our Syrian Jewish brothers would get out of the country.
Thank you.
Which was, by the way, that was a peanuts to spend to save 4,500 Jews. Believe me, those Jews today are flourishing in Brooklyn and doing tremendous for Am Israel. So every Jew count, every Jew that is attacked on this planet is important. And I beg everybody, anytime a Jew is attacked anywhere on this planet, stand up, be counted on. They need you. Every Jew that is attacked needs you, individual, each and every one of you. Be there for them. You must be there. We cannot depend on anybody but ourselves. Look at today what Israel is. Today we have our own army, we have our own air force, one of the best in the Middle East. And because we are all there, and we got to be there for Eretz Israel and for each and every Jew that is in trouble on this planet. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
So, as you know, one of the attributes Hashem teaches us is humility. And I'm going to ask you a question about your own experience. How did you keep your humility with so many wonderful accomplishments? I mean, obviously you were proud of what you accomplished, but I don't see you as a man that walks around boasting. You seem to be very proud. You seem to be very humble. How do you maintain your humility and at the same time exhilarating and happy and joyful and thank God you were able to help save so many Jewish lives?
Let me tell you, it goes back to our Bible. Abraham, our father, when he was asked, he said he was Afar and Efer. Afar means dirt. Efer means less than dirt. If Abraham, our forefather, the great Abraham, the father of all Jews and many nations, calls himself dirt, what am I? Less than dirt, less than that. So believe me, yes, I am the slave of Am Israel, and I am the servant of Hashem. He gives me a bowl, I take that bowl, and I go and I place it into the basket. I don't give that bowl, pass it to somebody else. I was given that bowl, I go and put it in a basket. If I pass somebody else, he might not be able to make it. So this is important to understand that whenever a mitzvah come to us, look to do it, and I promise you Hashem will give you another one back to back. And if I tell you, my entire life has been a back to back to back mitzvot. And you know what? I am grateful to Hashem for giving me all these opportunities to be there for my people. I thank you, Hashem, from the bottom of my heart. And I wish he gives me more. It's true that I'm 80 years old today, or almost getting 80 years old, but I still have a lot of power, a lot of energy built in me to do more mitzvot if he gives it to me. Thank you, Hashem.
So based on that last statement where you say you're pushing 80, you've got all this strength left in you, all this power. Do you think you can turn that around and bring home the remains of Eli Cohen?
Eli Cohen's remains are already in Israel. I don't know if you're aware. I will tell you. First of all, I believe Putin was involved with the release of the bones of Eli Cohen. And Eli Cohen was a great Egyptian, a guy that I looked up to because I was afraid that I would be hanging on a tree at age 16. Eli Cohen first was given to his wife his watch, and about 2 years ago, and his remains were brought in from to Israel, and I believe they came from the pressure of Putin on Assad. And Eli Cohen's bones today are buried in Israel, and I think they are on the Harazim or one of the mountains as a hero of Eretz Israel.
Yeah, I did hear that his personal effects were returned or managed to get back, but I did not know that they also managed to repatriate his remains, which I think is fantastic. So you have to find another job.
Yes, I'm looking. I'm talking to Hashem every day. Please give me another job, please. Let me find something else to do to keep myself occupied.
Let me give you a little hint. We met last month with a wonderful, also very wonderful Jew named Irving Roth, who had a tremendous story to tell, and I'm not going to go into it. But one of the things that in his ongoing legacy that he's leaving is educating young children about the Holocaust and about remembering families and remembering what happened, and to try and get young people today to lead their lives with certain kinds of values. Your story, almost in a sense, is part of the bigger global story of the Jewish exodus, whether it be from Egypt, whether it be from Syria, whether it be from Tunisia or anywhere. We all ultimately went to one place, Eretz Israel. Some of us got dispersed, but ultimately that was a big lesson, and we taught that every Pesach. Is there a message that you think you can be able to bring to the children of the world, whether it be in the form of a guide or a booklet or lectures or something that could help, using your experience, making them better leaders and better people and better contributors to their community later on?
I'm working on the book of my life, and I'm hoping that it will be emulated. I'm hoping I will be able to inspire the young people. I'm driving this. Tonight's speech is mainly guided towards our young Jewish generation, that when a problem occurs, when a Jew is attacked anywhere on this planet, you must understand you are obligated. Remember, we are our brother's keepers. That's what we are. We are our brother's keeper. That is what is written in our Bible, and that is what Hashem told us. You are our brother's keepers. So because we are our brother's keepers, would you let your brother suffer anywhere? No. You will be standing up and help him every way that you can. And that's what happened. When we didn't stand up for our brothers, look what happened. 6 million. If you count the population of the Jewish population back in the 1940s, we were 12 to 13 million. Half of the population was burned out because we didn't stand up and fight. We should have stood like hell to save those people, any way, shape, or form. And we did not. This is what happened when we don't stand up. Look at it, understand it, study it, believe in it. Let it go into your brains that you must help anytime, anywhere on this planet. This is the message that I got to give to the younger ones. I did it. I stood up. I did my job. You have to do your job from now on. And you have to understand, you are capable. You have the gift. Hashem gave you the power, the strength. Use it. Do not lose it. Use it. Understand you are built with such power. Just you tend to ignore it. You tend to be hesitant. Maybe I cannot do it. Don't think that I did not think the same way. How am I going to be capable to save a cemetery in Egypt when I am only a businessman? I'm only a businessman. I'm a shmata salesman. I manufacture shmatas. I'm not any politician, but yet I took it on. You know why? Because I believe that I have the power, because the power is in every one of you, and you should use it. Like I use it, you use it. You can do it. It can be done. Look what happened when 4 people just stood up for the Syrian Jews and we got 4,500 Jews saved. We could have stood up also for Germany and in Poland and all the Jews that died in the Holocaust. So please do your job like everybody does their job to save Jews. Yes, sir.
We know that what has always befallen the Jews in our history was always sinat chinam. It was our hatred for ourselves. It was the fact that we ourselves did not stand up for our fellow brethren, and we did not defend our beliefs. And it's because of that we turned against each other. That's why we were ultimately suffered so much throughout history. I'm just going to mention that at the end of this session, by the way, Adam Lee says he's very proud of you. So
thank you, Adam. Thank you.
I think that's the only message I'm reading out loud from that screen, because I think that's very, very, very important. Just to let everybody know that we're going to just get to closing remarks by Rabbi Cohen, but before that, at the end of the session, we're going to have a musical interlude, an IDF rendition of the Misha Berach. I think you're going to enjoy it. We had it last month as well. And Clement has one last thing to say, and then we're going to hand it over to Rabbi Cohen. Go ahead, Clement.
One more last thing is that I want to thank from the bottom of my heart, my wife, Emma. She stood with me every step of the way. From day one, she allowed me to do all the things that I wanted to do. And without her, I could have never done or accomplished any of these. And I really thank her for being there. Her name is Esther Bat Rezel Gottlieb, and I thank her from the bottom of my heart for doing what she has done for me all of my life. Thank you, Emma.
Okay, and the last word, don't forget, we need your support at the seminary. So if you can take the moment to go to the website, theseminary.ca, we would appreciate it as well. Take it away, Rabbi.
Thank you very much. Wow, wow, wow. Clement, you blew me away. I know I spoke to you an hour on the phone, but you just blew me away. I am so inspired by your emunah, by your faith and belief in God. And, you know, you remind me what I learned in the yeshiva, when ha'oskim b'tzarchei tzibur be'emunah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu meshalem scharam. We say it every Shabbat before Musaf. Those who occupy themselves in the needs of the tzibur, in the needs of the community, to make sure that the community is well. HaKadosh Baruch Hu meshalem scharam, that God Almighty is the one that rewards you and pushes you and uplifts you. So I think it's a beautiful lesson that the Ben Weider lecture series could now present to the community, that be there for other people, be there for somebody else, reach out to somebody else, reach out to uplift somebody else. And when you do that, then God uplifts you. You know, it's very funny, and it's something that's very strange. I give lectures one-on-one within my community, within our supporters of the seminary, and I once told them something that my father-in-law, Rabbi Chaim Swed, alav shalom, taught me in Mexico City. He was the Chabad Shliach in Mexico. He's one of the known rabbis in Mexico. Today you say Chacham Chaim Swed, everybody knows who you're talking about in Mexico City. And he said like this, that when you reach out to help another Jew, when you reach out to lift up another Jew, so that not only does the other Jew that lifted and that inspired, but your life becomes much more an inspired life. You become inspired. You get an advantage out of it. So, don't do it and don't think you're doing it only for that person. Know and understand that when you do something for somebody else, your life gets enhanced. You become a better person. When you do good to somebody, you become a good person. So Clement, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for giving this very special message to our youth, to our community, to the people watching right here tonight, and to all those who are going to be watching in the next few weeks as we're going to disperse this message to everybody. And I thank you again for sharing a very important message as we prepare ourselves. We're in the summer, but soon is Rosh Hashanah. We're going to start soon a new year in a few weeks from now, and it's a beautiful lesson to take. Without any further ado, I'm going to give it over to Aaron. We had a beautiful rendition. Clement, you're going to love this. It's sung by our soldiers. It's Mishe Berach Avotenu Avraham, Yitzchak v'Yaakov. It's in the most beautiful, in the most beautiful tune and voice.
Thank you,
Aaron. Could you give us a little bit of an intro before we do the Mishe Berach?
Well, it's done by a very famous rabbi, Aryeh. He's a chazan. Actually, he's not a rabbi; he's a chazan, Aryeh Horowitz, and he's led on together with the Rinat Israel choir, and I think you'll enjoy it. It ties itself into the defense of our nation, the IDF. And go ahead, Yossi, who is working behind the scenes, and he's controlling the studio. He's the mastermind. And press play.
Abraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov, hu yevarech et chayalei tzva hagana leYisrael. Hu yevarech et chayalei tzva hagana leYisrael. Hu yevarech et chayalei tzva hagana leYisrael. Ha'omdim al mishmar arzenu ve'arei Elokeinu migvul הלבנון ועד מדבר מצרים ומן הים הגדול עד לבוא הערבה ביבשות באוויר ובים הוא יברך את חיילי צבא הגנה לישראל. הוא יברך את חיילי צבא הגנה לישראל. הוא יברך את חיילי Hashem toivenu הקמים עלינו ניגפים לפניהם. הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמור ויציל את חיילינו מכל צרה וצוקה ומכל נגע ומחלה, וישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיהם, ידבר שונאינו תחתיהם, ויתרם בכתר ישועה ובעטרת ניצחון, ויקוים בהם הכתוב. כי יד השם אלוקיכם ההולך עמכם להילחם לכם עם אויביכם להושיע אתכם ונאמר
Beautiful.
Beautiful. So before we wrap up, I want to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Clement Soffer to be here with us tonight, inspiring the community of Montreal, inspiring our youth, inspiring our parents, and inspiring all of our elders in the community as well to continue to have emunah, faith in God, emunah in God Almighty. That is the basic and that is the fiber of which the Jewish people have been made up for all the generations. I also want to take this opportunity to thank Aaron, my friend, again, Mr. Reamer. Aaron Reamer, thank you very much for a superb presentation, a superb dialogue together with Mr. Soffer, which made it so easy and so comprehensible for our community to follow along. Last but not least, I want to thank my assistant, my executive assistant, Miriam. Also behind the scenes, she's been pushing the buttons, sending the emails, being in contact with Clement, with Aaron, making sure that the clockwork is working behind the scenes. So Miriam, thank you very much for your dedication, for your devotion, and for doing everything with your whole heart. Last but not least, I want to thank my little Buba, my little Yossi. Yossi is the IT person behind the screens and behind the like we say, pushing the button, making sure that the screens go on, go off, and the meetings that we've had up until this evening, the different gatherings and get-togethers that we had in order to make this happen. I want to thank all of you. This was a successful evening. I'm glad that we had it. I'm glad everybody enjoyed. So stay tuned for our next lecture. Be with us, stay with us. And please don't forget theseminary.ca/donate if you'd like to participate in this lecture for this evening, which will make it easier and which will make it easier and much needed for the seminary for tonight. Be well, shalom, boni, laila tov, and hope to see you next time.
Azlaha. Thank you.